On the outskirts of Cedar Grove, where cornfields stretch toward the horizon, James Miller's weathered hands tell a story of 30 years working the same stubborn soil. His once thriving farm now struggles under mounting debts and unforgiving seasons. Yet on this crisp autumn morning, fate has something different in store. At the edge of his field, beside a broken stroller, lies a 6-month-old baby, motionless but breathing. The child's legs, James discovers, are paralyzed. Despite his own hardships, something stirs in his heart, a fierce determination he hasn't felt in years. What could drive a struggling farmer to sell his prized horse and risk everything for a paralyzed baby left at his doorstep? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The old ledger in James Miller's kitchen drawer tells its own story. Faded ink marks trace 3 decades of careful records, each season's plantings, harvests, and slim margins carefully documented in his father's neat hand. Then his own. These days, the numbers paint a bleaker picture than he'd care to admit. James adjusts his reading glasses, squinting at yesterday's entry. Another equipment repair he can't afford, another bank payment barely made. At 62, his joints ache more than they used to, especially in the pre-dawn hours when he makes his solitary rounds of the property. The Miller farm had been something to see in its heyday. His father, Robert, built the operation from 70 acres to 300, adding the eastern pastures where draft horses once pulled their weight in gold. James remembers summer evenings when the barn buzzed with activity, hired hands bringing in the last hay bales, his mother Catherine calling, everyone in for supper, the sweet scent of fresh-baked bread mixing with timothy grass and leather. But times changed. The big operations moved in, squeezing family farms like his into ever tighter corners. Sarah, his wife of 35 years, had kept their books balanced through sheer determination and part-time work at the library. She had a way of making ends meet, of finding hope in the smallest victories. "We Miller men," she'd say, smoothing his worried brow, "are too stubborn to fail." 2 years since her passing, and James still catches himself turning to share news with an empty chair. The house feels too big now, too quiet. Their daughter Amanda lives 3 states away with her own family, calling dutifully every Sunday, but unable to leave her life in Chicago to help with the farm. He doesn't blame her. The land hasn't been kind to anyone lately. The community changed too. Where neighbors once gathered for barn raisings and harvest celebrations, now most people keep to themselves. The Johnsons sold out last spring, their century farm, carved into luxury rural estates by some developer from the city. The Thompson place sits empty, its fields untended. Even the church suppers draw smaller crowds each year. James maintains his routines. Up at 4:30, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, morning checks of the remaining livestock. These days, that's just 12 dairy cows, down from the 40-head herd they once managed. And his prized Belgian horse, Thunder, the big stallion, is the last of a long line of draft horses the Millers bred for showing and farm work. In better times, Thunder's bloodline brought good money. Now, he's more of a reminder of what was lost. And the last thing James can't bring himself to sell. The local bank manager, Tom Peterson, keeps hinting about retirement options and land value assessments. James knows what that means. The same story playing out across the county, family farms swallowed up by corporations or carved into suburban plots. But this land holds more than market value for James. Every fence post has a memory, every field a story. Sarah's rose garden still blooms by the front porch, though the weeds creep in more than she would have allowed. It's funny how a man can be lonely in the same place he once felt most connected. Sometimes driving the tractor down familiar rows, James catches himself remembering Sunday dinners with every chair filled, the laughter of his daughter learning to ride her first pony, Sarah's smile as she hung laundry in the summer breeze. The memories feel like scenes from someone else's life now. Yet each morning, James still pulls on his boots, still walks his fields, still tends what remains of the Miller legacy. A farmer, his father used to say, is just a man who believes in tomorrow. These days, James isn't sure what tomorrow holds, but he holds on anyway. It's what Miller men do. He never expected that tomorrow would arrive in the form of an abandoned baby at the edge of his cornfield, never imagined that his lonely routine was about to be shattered by a discovery that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about faith, family, and the true meaning of legacy. James's hands trembled as he lifted the infant from beside the broken stroller. The baby's skin felt cool to the touch. Too cool. Tiny breaths came in shallow puffs, visible in the autumn air. How long had the child been out here? The morning. Dew had already soaked through the light blanket, and the stroller lay twisted as if it had rolled down the drainage ditch. Inside the farmhouse, James laid the baby on his kitchen table, mind racing. The child's legs remained motionless, even as small arms reached up, dark eyes now open and watching. A boy, James realized as he unwrapped the wet clothing. No note. No identification, just a blue onesie with cartoon dinosaurs. "It's all right, little fellow," James murmured, his voice scratchy from disuse. When was the last time he'd spoken aloud? Yesterday, maybe, talking to thunder in the barn? The baby's answering whimper snapped him back to the urgent present. Sarah would have known what to do. She'd raised Amanda, worked in the church nursery, always seemed to have a sense about these things. James found himself standing in their bedroom doorway, staring at her dresser where her old craft basket still sat. The wooden cradle she'd used for Amanda was long gone, given away to some young couple at church years ago. But there, in the craft basket, knitting needles still stuck in one of her unfinished projects. James grabbed the half-done blanket, now dusty but soft. Back in the kitchen, he wrapped it around the shivering infant, while his other hand fumbled with the ancient rotary phone on the wall. 911? Yes, I've found a baby, his voice caught. He's alive, but something's wrong with his legs. They're not moving at all. The dispatcher's calm voice guided him through basic checks. Breathing? Yes. Alert? Becoming more so. Temperature? James pressed weathered lips to the tiny forehead, like Sarah used to do with Amanda. Cool, but not cold, he reported. Maybe 6 months old, I'm not sure. Help is on the way, sir. Stay on the line. While they waited, James remembered the emergency kit Sarah kept under the sink. Inside, he found an old hot water bottle. He filled it carefully, wrapped it in a towel and placed it near, but not touching, the baby. The child's eyes followed his movements, tiny fingers reaching out to grasp James's calloused thumb. The grip was surprisingly strong. In the distance, sirens wailed. James glanced around his kitchen, dishes from yesterday's solitary supper still in the sink, ancient wallpaper peeling at the corners, Sarah's novelty rooster clock marking time, as it had for 30 years. When was the last time these walls had witnessed anything but his own quiet routine? The baby made a soft sound, not quite a cry. "Guess we both got quite a surprise this morning," James said softly. "Don't you worry. Help's coming." But even as the ambulance pulled into his gravel driveway, James felt something shift inside his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't experienced since Amanda was small. This child, abandoned at the edge of his failing farm, had awakened something. He thought long dormant. The paramedics were professionals, efficient and quick. They checked vital signs, bundled the baby onto a tiny stretcher, asked questions James couldn't answer. No, he hadn't seen anyone. No, he didn't know how long the baby had been there. Yes, he'd found the child just like that, legs unmoving. "You did good, sir," the younger paramedic said, patting James's shoulder. "We'll take it from here." But as they turned toward the door, the baby started to wail, the first real cry since James had found him. Without thinking, James stepped forward. "I'll follow in my truck," he heard himself say. Someone should stay with him." The paramedics exchanged glances but nodded. As James grabbed his coat, His eyes fell on Sarah's old blanket, still warming from the child's body heat. He gathered it up, pausing only to lock the door, a habit Sarah had instilled in him, though few in Cedar Grove bothered with locks anymore. The morning sun was breaking through the clouds as James climbed into his pickup. Behind the ambulance, following its dust trail down the gravel road, he realized he was talking to Sarah again. "What am I getting myself into, old girl?" he whispered, to the empty passenger seat. But for the first time in 2 years, the silence that answered him didn't feel quite so heavy. The fluorescent lights of Cedar Grove Medical Center cast harsh shadows across the pediatric waiting room. James sat alone, Sarah's unfinished blanket still clutched in his weathered hands. 3 hours had passed since they'd whisked the baby away for examination. The morning's chaos had settled into an anxious quiet, broken only by the steady tick of a wall clock and occasional squeaks of nurses' shoes on linoleum. "Mr. Miller?" He looked up to find Ellen Carson, a nurse he recognized from church, though he hadn't attended since Sarah's funeral. Her face carried that careful neutrality medical professionals perfect over years of delivering difficult news. "The doctor would like to speak with you." She paused, studying him. "James, you know, you're not technically family, but since you're the one who found him, I'm all he's got right now," James finished quietly. Ellen's expression softened. "Yes, you are." The doctor's office felt too small for the three of them. James, Ellen, and Dr. Patterson, a pediatric specialist who'd apparently been called in from the county hospital. The medical file on his desk looked thick for a baby they'd only known about for a few hours. "The good news," Dr. Patterson began, "is that the baby, we're calling him John Doe for now, is stable. No hypothermia, though it was a close thing." "You found him just in time, Mr. Miller." James nodded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "The concerning news is that our initial assessment confirms significant paralysis in both lower limbs. From our tests and imaging, this appears to be a congenital condition, something he was born with, rather than an injury. There's evidence of previous medical care, but it seems to have been interrupted some time ago." The doctor slid several papers across his desk. James recognized them as medical charts, though the terminology meant little to him. "These are the results of our preliminary tests. The condition is called spinal muscular atrophy, SMA. It's a genetic disorder that affects the nerve cells controlling voluntary muscle movement." "But he can move his arms," James said, remembering the strong grip on his thumb. "Yes, type 2. SMA typically affects the lower body more severely than the upper body. With proper care, physical therapy, respiratory support when needed, and possibly some new treatments that have been showing promise, many children with this condition can lead full lives. But it requires consistent, specialized medical attention." Ellen leaned forward. "The police are searching for his parents. In the meantime, social services will need to place him in emergency foster care with someone equipped to handle his medical needs." Something tightened in James's chest, the image of the baby alone in some institution, surrounded by strangers. "How much?" he heard himself ask. "Excuse me? The treatments, the therapy, how much would it cost?" Dr. Patterson cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller, you need to understand, this isn't a short-term situation. We're talking about ongoing care, possibly for years. The newer treatments alone can run into tens of thousands of dollars. Without insurance—" "I understand." James's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm asking anyway." Ellen and the doctor exchanged glances. Then Ellen pulled another chair closer to James. "You're thinking of taking him in yourself, aren't you?" When James didn't immediately answer, she continued gently. "James, I knew Sarah. I know what kind of man you are. But this would be a huge commitment. The farm is already failing," James finished. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's time for something different." Dr. Patterson leaned back, studying James with new interest. "You'd need training, the right equipment, home modifications. It's not just about money, though that's certainly a major factor. This is a full-time commitment. James looked down at Sarah's blanket, still wrapped around his fingers. He thought about the empty rooms in his farmhouse, the quiet that had settled over his life like dust. He thought about small fingers gripping his thumb with surprising strength. "I'd like to see him again," James said, before any decisions are made. "Could I do that?" Ellen stood. "I'll take you to him." The pediatric ward was quiet at this hour. In a small room at the end of the hall, surrounded by monitoring equipment that made him look even tinier, the baby lay sleeping. Someone had dressed him in a clean hospital onesie. His dark hair had been gently combed, and his small chest rose and fell peacefully. As if sensing their presence, his eyes fluttered open. When he saw James, his face broke into a toothless grin that crinkled his entire face. "Well, would you look at that?" Ellen whispered. "He remembers you." James felt something crack open inside his chest, something he'd thought was sealed shut the day they buried Sarah. Without taking his eyes off the baby, he asked, "What's the first step? If someone wanted to try." He could hear the smile in Ellen's voice as she answered, "I'll get you the paperwork." The Cedar Grove Gazette rarely printed special editions, but by Wednesday morning, the story had spread too far to wait for the weekly Thursday paper. "Local farmer finds abandoned infant," ran above the fold, accompanied by a hastily snapped photo of James's farmhouse. The article beneath was sparse on details, but heavy on speculation, particularly about the baby's origins and James's unexpected involvement in the case. Martha Chen, who'd been editing the Gazette since before James married Sarah, had called him for comment. He'd given her the bare facts, knowing anything more might compromise the ongoing police investigation. But facts had a way of getting embellished. In Cedar Grove, spreading from the diner to the feed store, growing more elaborate with each retelling. "Heard it was one of them city folks' babies," Earl Watson declared over morning coffee at the Pine Street diner. "Probably couldn't handle a special needs child, figured dumping it on farm folk was better than proper channels." "Now that's just speculation," Betty Harrison, the diner's owner for 30 years, chided as she topped off coffee cups. "What matters is James Miller's involved." Sarah would have been proud. The mention of Sarah's name hushed the morning crowd. Everyone remembered her funeral, how the church couldn't hold all the mourners, how James had stood so still and quiet by the grave. 2 years hadn't dimmed the community's memory of her kindness, her quiet strength. "He can't possibly manage it alone," someone muttered. "Man can barely keep his farm running." "That's not fair." Ellen Carson spoke up from her usual corner booth. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the conversation was hard to ignore. "James Miller's got more heart than half this town put together, and he's not alone, not if we don't want him to be." The nursing home where Ellen worked had seen its share of Miller kindness over the years. Sarah's holiday visits with home-baked goods, James quietly ploughing the parking lot during heavy snows, never accepting payment. The Millers had always been there when the community needed them. By afternoon, the story had reached the church basement, where the Ladies' Aid Society was preparing for their monthly meeting. Usually they focused on quilting and planning bake sales. Today, they had a different mission. "We'll need to organize a proper support system," Margaret Wilson, the Society's president, announced. "Regular meals to start with. And someone needs to look into what kind of equipment that baby will need. The house will need modifications," Ellen added, having stopped by after her shift. "Ramps, maybe, special furniture, and James will need training in physical therapy techniques." The women bent their heads together, making lists, assigning tasks. Years of organizing harvest festivals and disaster relief had honed their efficiency. But this was different. This was for James, for Sarah's memory, for a baby who'd appeared, like a miracle on their doorstep. Out at the farm, James was oblivious to the stirring he'd caused. He spent the morning on the phone with social services, filling out preliminary paperwork for emergency foster care. The social worker had seemed skeptical at first, a single man his age, running a struggling farm, wanting to take in a special needs child. But Ellen had made some calls, thrown her professional weight behind his application. The afternoon found him in the spare bedroom that had once been Amanda's. Dust motes danced in sunbeams as he opened long closed curtains. The room would need work, new paint, proper medical equipment, safety modifications. The list seemed endless, the costs daunting. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Old neighbors he hadn't heard from in months, church members, even Amanda calling again from Chicago. "Dad, are you sure about this?" she asked, worry clear in her voice. "I could try to come home for a few weeks, help you get set up." "You've got your own family to think about," he reminded her gently. "I'll manage." "But how?" James looked out the window at his fields, at the farm that had seemed like such a burden just days ago. "Your mother always said a community raises a child. Guess we're about to find out if Cedar Grove remembers that." As if in answer, a truck pulled into his driveway. Betty Harrison's old Ford, loaded with what looked like enough casseroles to feed an army. Behind her, a line of cars stretched down his gravel drive, each one carrying someone with something to offer: time, supplies, support, hope. The baby might have been abandoned by his first family, but it seemed he'd already found his second. Thunder's coat gleamed in the early morning light, each brushstroke revealing the deep chestnut shine that had won so many ribbons. James worked methodically, the familiar rhythm of curry comb and brush almost meditative. The big Belgian horse leaned into each stroke, as if knowing these moments together were numbered. The specialist's estimate sat folded in James's pocket, the numbers burning through the paper like a brand. 25,000 for the initial treatment phase alone. The community's support had been overwhelming. Casseroles and baby supplies, arriving daily, offers of help with farm work. Even a small fund started at the church, but good intentions couldn't cover medical bills. "What do you think, old friend?" James murmured, running his hand along Thunder's powerful neck. The horse nickered softly, bumping James's shoulder with his velvet nose. "Yeah, I know. Sarah would say I'm being foolish, talking to a horse about life decisions." But Sarah had also been the one who taught him that sometimes love meant letting go. He'd watched her do it with Amanda, supporting their daughter's move to Chicago, even though it broke her heart. "Love isn't about holding on," she'd said. "It's about doing what's right, even when it hurts." The horse show circuit had already caught wind that Thunder might be available. 3 calls yesterday alone, each offering more than the last. James had raised this horse from a colt, the last of a bloodline that had been in his family for generations. Thunder's grandfather had pulled the wagon at their wedding. His father had given Amanda her first rides. Now, Thunder himself was the last piece of that history James had left to sell. The highest offer had come from a breeding farm in Kentucky. Good people, by all accounts. They'd keep Thunder as a stud, let him live out his days in comfort. More importantly, they'd offered enough to cover the baby's initial treatments, with something left over for the necessary house modifications. Miller residence. James had learned to answer his phone properly again. These days bringing so many calls from medical and social services. "Mr. Miller, this is Dr. Patterson. I wanted to discuss John's treatment timeline." "Thomas," James interrupted quietly. "His name is Thomas." He hadn't told anyone yet, had barely admitted to himself that he'd been thinking of it. Thomas Robert Miller. His father's name, Sarah's father's name, a name with history, with weight, a pause on the line. Thomas, then. "Mr. Miller, we need to begin treatment soon if we want the best possible outcome. The newest protocols show significant improvement in mobility when started early, but the window of opportunity—" "I understand." James watched Thunder through the barn window, magnificent even in repose. "I'll have the initial payment by Friday." Another pause. "The full amount?" "Yes." "Mr. Miller, James, are you sure about this? There are other options, payment plans, medical loans." But James knew about loans, knew how they could stretch, out like shadows, darkening everything they touched. The farm already carried enough debt. This needed to be clean, decisive, a sacrifice freely given. He spent that afternoon updating Thunder's papers, vaccination records, show ribbons, breeding, history. His hands shook slightly as he added the bill of sale to the stack. The breeding farm's trailer would arrive tomorrow morning. Ellen stopped by as the sun was setting, carrying yet another casserole and news from the hospital. She found James in the barn, sitting on an old tack trunk, Thunder's newest ribbon still in his hands. James. She settled beside him, understanding dawning as she saw the papers. Oh, James. It's the right thing, he said, voice rough. They're good. People, Ellen, they'll take care of him. She covered his hand with hers. I know, but it's still hard. Sarah always said. He had to stop, clear his throat. She said you measure a man not by what he keeps, but by what he's willing to give up for something that matters more. Ellen squeezed his hand. She'd be proud of you. You know that, right? Through the barn door, they could see the hospital wing where Thomas lay, its windows lighting up as evening fell. Somewhere in that building, a baby who'd been abandoned at the edge of a failing farm was fighting to move his legs, to build a future that nobody had planned for. A baby who smiled every time James walked into the room, who gripped his finger with surprising strength, who represented a hope neither of them had expected to find. You know what else Sarah used to say? James carefully placed the ribbon with the other papers. She said, God never closes a door without opening a window. Guess sometimes he just needs a little help with the latch. The barn renovation plans spread across Betty Harrison's largest diner table, coffee cups carefully arranged around its edges. What had started as rough sketches on a napkin had evolved into proper architectural drawings, courtesy of Pete Martinez, who'd retired from his city architecture firm to Cedar Grove 3 years ago. The main challenge, Pete explained, pointing to the cross-section of the barn's eastern wing, is creating a climate-controlled space without losing the building's structural integrity. These old barns, they need to breathe. Around the table, an unlikely committee had assembled. Pete with his architectural expertise, Ellen Carson representing medical requirements, Bob Wilson, the retired contractor, and James, who still found himself stunned by how his private decision had become a community project. We'll need proper insulation, Bob mused, making notes. And that floor needs to be perfectly level for the therapy equipment. James, when was the last time anyone redid that concrete? My father poured it, James admitted. 1962, I think. Betty refreshed their coffee cups, lingering to study the plans. The space where Thunder's stall had been would become a physical therapy area, complete with specialized equipment. The tack room would transform into a climate-controlled storage space for medical supplies. The hayloft above, once cleared, could serve as a rec room for when Thomas got older. Thomas. The name had caught on quickly, as if the community had been waiting to stop calling him the baby or John Doe. He'd been discharged from the hospital 3 days ago, temporarily placed in James's emergency foster care while the official adoption process began. The social workers had been impressed by the detailed plans for his care, plans that Ellen had helped coordinate, the community had embraced, and James had committed to with quiet determination. Miller! The diner's door chimed as Earl Watson burst in, still wearing his feed store apron. That lumber you ordered just showed up at the store. Got 5 guys with pickup trucks ready to haul it out to your place. James reached for his wallet, but Earl waved him off. Already taken care of. Anonymous donation if anyone asks. He winked at Betty, who suddenly became very interested in wiping down the counter. The renovation itself became something of a barn raising for the modern age. Trucks started arriving at dawn the next morning. Not just the lumber delivery, but a steady stream of community members bearing tools, supplies, and willing hands. Bob Wilson took charge of the overall coordination, his contractor's experience, showing in how smoothly teams were organized and tasks delegated. Reminds me of when we rebuilt the Johnson's place after that tornado in '89. Margaret Wilson commented, organizing the lunch preparations with military precision. The Ladies' Aid Society had set up a proper kitchen in the farmhouse. Feeding, crews in shifts. James found himself moving between groups, answering questions, offering what help he could. But more often than not, he ended up on his back porch, Thomas secure in his arms, watching the transformation unfold. The baby seemed fascinated by the activity, his dark eyes tracking the movement of people and materials. "Your daddy's got quite a community behind him," Ellen observed during one of her regular visits to check on Thomas's care. She'd started calling James Daddy almost immediately, as if speaking, it would make it more real. "Never thought I'd see anything like this again," James admitted. "Not since the old days." The work continued through the week. Pete's careful plans ensured that while the interior was completely modernized, the barn's external appearance remained unchanged, a deliberate choice to preserve the farm's heritage. New windows were cut to match existing ones, the medical equipment door designed to look like traditional barn doors. On Sunday, the church service let out early so everyone could help with the final push. The pastor himself showed up in work, clothes, collar visible under his overalls, and spent the afternoon installing insulation. By sunset, the transformation was nearly complete. The concrete floor had been leveled and finished, walls insulated and sealed, medical-grade lighting installed. The therapy equipment would arrive next week, along with training for James in its proper use. Standing in the doorway of the renovated space, Thomas sleeping peacefully against his shoulder. James felt the weight of what this represented. This wasn't just a barn conversion, it was the community's way of saying they were in this with him, that his decision to take in an abandoned child had awakened something in Cedar Grove that had been dormant for too long. "Well, Sarah," he whispered, "looks like we're not just raising a child, we're rebuilding a community." As if in agreement, Thomas stirred slightly, his small hand clutching James's shirt in that now familiar grip of complete trust. The care journal Ellen had insisted James keep sat open on the kitchen table, its pages filling with observations, milestones, and the daily rhythms of Thomas's care. James's handwriting, usually reserved for equipment maintenance logs and seed orders, had grown more precise as he documented each detail of his son's progress. October 15th, first physical therapy session in the new barn. Thomas showed good upper body response. Smiled through most exercises. Dr. Patterson says his arm strength is encouraging. October 17th, successfully completed tube feeding without assistance. Ellen says technique improving. Thomas held head up for full minute during tummy time. October 20. First belly laugh during morning exercises. Sound reminded me so much of Amanda at that age. Had to stop for a moment. Need to work on emotional control during therapy sessions. The morning routine had taken on its own peculiar dance. Up at 4:30 still, but now for a different kind of care. Bottle warming while checking Thomas's breathing and position. Physical therapy exercises before the day grew too warm, taking advantage of the baby's morning alertness, recording every small victory, every setback, every change in muscle response. "You're getting quite professional with those movements," Ellen noted during one of her supervisory visits. She watched as James gently worked Thomas's legs through their daily exercises, his large hands impossibly gentle on the tiny limbs. "Had good teachers," James replied, focused on maintaining the precise angle Dr. Patterson had demonstrated. The physical therapy team had been impressed by how quickly he'd picked up the techniques, though James suspected his years of handling delicate farm equipment had helped more than they realized. The hardest part wasn't the medical procedures or even the physical demands. It was maintaining hope when progress seemed slow, celebrating tiny improvements that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. A stronger grip during morning exercises, a few seconds longer holding his head up. The way his legs, though still largely immobile, sometimes showed the slightest twitch during therapy. October 23rd. Thomas tracked the therapy ball for full session today. Shows increasing interest in moving objects. Tried reaching for it twice. Note, red seems to be his favorite color. Some entries were less clinical. October 25th. Woke up to find Thomas had somehow worked his way to the side of the crib where the morning sun hits. Smart boy already figuring out the warm spots, just like the barn cats used to. Sarah would have loved that. The night feedings remained the most intimate times. In the quiet hours when the world narrowed to just the two of them, James often found himself talking to Thomas, sharing stories of the farm's history, of Sarah, of the family they were building together. Your grandmother had a way about her. He'd say, bottle held at just the right angle as Dr. Patterson had shown him. Could look at a person and know exactly what they needed. Guess she'd have known right away that we needed each other. The medical equipment that had initially seemed so intimidating became familiar tools. The feeding pump, the therapy aids, the monitoring devices. Each had its place, its purpose, its own role in the daily routine. James approached them with the same methodical care he'd once given to maintaining his farm equipment, though the stakes felt infinitely higher. October 28th, breakthrough during afternoon session. Thomas maintained grip on therapy ring for 37 seconds. Timed. Previous record was 22 seconds. Called Ellen immediately to report. She reminded me to breathe. Some days were harder than others. Days when Thomas seemed frustrated by his limitations, when the exercises drew tears instead of smiles, when progress felt more like hope than reality. On those days, James would bundle him up and take him to the barn, now transformed into their in-therapy space, but still carrying echoes of its former life. This used to be Thunder's stall, he'd explain, holding Thomas so he could see the afternoon light streaming through the new windows. He'd stand right here, watching the sunrise. Didn't know it then, but he was making space for something more important. The Care Journal recorded these moments too, though in less clinical terms. October 30th, rough day. Thomas frustrated during morning exercises. Spent afternoon in barn watching rain. He settled when I hummed Sarah's old hymns. Note, music seems to help during difficult sessions. Remember to ask Dr. Patterson about music therapy. Each entry, whether celebrating progress or acknowledging setbacks, ended the same way. Tomorrow we try again. It became more than just a medical record. It was the story of two lives intertwining, of a family being forged through daily acts, of care and persistence. Between the lines of clinical observations and therapy notes lay the deeper truth. Love, like healing, was a practice of patience, hope, and unwavering commitment. The stack of medical bills on James's desk grew taller as December deepened, each envelope marked with increasingly urgent red stamps. The proceeds from Thunder's sale had covered the initial treatments, but ongoing therapy, medications, and equipment needs stretched far beyond those funds. The winter wind rattled the farmhouse windows as James worked his way through the pile, calculator in hand. Even with the community's support and his careful budgeting, the numbers refused to add up. The latest statement from Cedar Grove Medical Center alone was enough to make his hands shake. $12,137 for the past month's treatments and specialist consultations. Through the baby monitor, he could hear Thomas's peaceful breathing from the nursery. The sound had become his anchor, a reminder of what really mattered. But good intentions didn't pay bills, and the harsh reality of their situation was becoming impossible to ignore. "You've got options, James," Tom Peterson had said during an unusually gentle meeting at the bank. "The farm's land value has increased. Since the new highway announcement, a partial sale, even just the back 40, could clear your medical debt and create a cushion." The suggestion felt like a physical blow. That land had been in the Miller family for 3 generations. His father had worked himself to exhaustion, clearing those back acres, turning wilderness into productive fields. Yet here he sat, contemplating, selling it piece by piece. Ellen found him still at his desk that evening during her weekly check-in. One look at the scattered papers told her everything. Bad, huh? Getting there. James pushed the latest bill across the desk. Ellen's sharp intake of breath said enough. The new treatment protocol is showing real promise, she said quietly. His upper body strength is improving weekly. You saw how long he held himself up yesterday. I know. James's voice was rough. That's what makes it harder. He's fighting so hard, Ellen, making progress. How can I? He gestured at the bills, unable to finish. The winter storm that hit that weekend tested them all. The power went out across Cedar Grove, transforming their carefully regulated routine into a desperate scramble to maintain Thomas's care. The backup generator, another gift from the community, kept the essential medical equipment running. But the ancient farmhouse's heating system couldn't keep up with the bitter cold. James moved Thomas's crib into the living room closest to the wood stove. He spent the night feeding the fire, watching frost patterns creep across the windows, calculating how long their generator fuel would last. The house's every crack and aging seal became apparent as the wind found its way inside, making the flames dance and Thomas stir in his sleep. Morning brought Ellen through snowdrifts, checking on them as soon as the roads were passable. She found James dozing in Sarah's old rocking chair beside the crib, his hand resting on Thomas's chest, as if to reassure himself of each breath. "You can't keep doing this alone," she said, after confirming Thomas's condition was stable. "Not alone," James corrected tiredly. "Got the whole town helping." "That's not what I meant." Ellen hesitated, then pressed on. "There's a fundraising committee forming at the church. Margaret Wilson's idea. They want to organize a proper campaign, not just for emergency expenses, but for Thomas's long-term care." James straightened, pride warring with necessity. "Ellen, James Miller, you listen to me." Her tone was gentle, but firm. "This community has watched you sacrifice everything. Your prize horse, your retirement savings, maybe soon your land, all for a child that Providence dropped at your doorstep. Let us help. Not just with casseroles and volunteer hours, but with the hard parts too." Through the frost-covered windows, James could see neighbors clearing his driveway without being asked, their trucks parked at odd angles in the snow. Bob Wilson was up on a ladder, patching a spot where the wind had torn loose a piece of siding. Someone had left a fresh stack of firewood on the porch. Thomas stirred in his crib, making the small morning sounds that James had come to know by heart. When he picked him up, the baby snuggled into his chest with complete trust, tiny fingers gripping his sweater. "Your mother used to say," James spoke softly as much to himself as to Ellen, "that pride was just fear wearing a fancy coat." He looked down at Thomas, then at the bills scattered across his desk. "Guess it's time to hang that coat up." The custody application lay open on James's kitchen table, its pages dense with legal terminology and requirements that seemed designed to discourage rather than assist. His lawyer, David Chen from the county seat, had highlighted the key sections in yellow, but even those felt overwhelming. "Financial stability is our biggest hurdle," David explained, tapping the relevant paragraph. "The court needs to see that you can provide long-term care for a child with special medical needs. Your current situation," he trailed off diplomatically. James understood what wasn't being said. A 62-year-old single farmer with mounting debts and a failing property wasn't exactly the ideal candidate for adopting a special needs child. The fact that he'd already been Thomas's emergency foster parent for 3 months helped, but it wasn't enough. "What about the community support?" James asked. "The fundraising committee, the therapy barn, Ellen's medical oversight?" "All positive." "Factors," David agreed, "but the court needs more concrete assurances. They'll want to see—" The phone's sharp ring interrupted them. Ellen's number flashed on the display. "James?" Her voice carried an urgency that made him sit straighter. "The police just called the hospital. They've found Thomas's birth mother." The world seemed to tilt sideways. James looked at Thomas, napping peacefully in his specially adapted cradle. Near the wood stove, 3 months of daily care had created a map of love across the baby's features, the way his nose crinkled when concentrating on therapy exercises, how his eyes lit up during their morning routines, the particular cry that meant he wanted to be held rather than needed anything specific. "She's young," Ellen continued gently. 19, says she left him at your farm because she'd heard about your wife's work with special needs children at the church. Sarah's reputation for kindness had outlived her. The irony might have been beautiful if it didn't threaten to tear James's world apart. The birth mother, Lisa Reynolds, they learned, arrived with her own lawyer the next day. She was barely more than a child herself, her face a mixture of fear and determination as she sat in James's living room. Her story spilled out in bits and pieces. The unexpected diagnosis during pregnancy, the overwhelming medical predictions, the father's immediate abandonment, her own parents' pressure to consider institutional care. I thought, she twisted a tissue in her hands. I thought if I left him somewhere safe with people who'd know what to do. I've been reading about him in the papers, about everything you've done, Mr. Miller. The therapy barn, the treatments, the way the whole town helped. James recognized the longing in her voice. It was the same tone he heard in his own when talking about Thomas's progress. The legal machinery ground into motion. Court dates were set. Social workers compiled reports. The community rallied again, this time with letters of support and character testimonials. Margaret Wilson organized a letter-writing campaign that nearly overwhelmed the family court clerk's office. The ideal outcome, David advised, during another kitchen table conference, would be a shared arrangement. Lisa's young, she has family support now, and she clearly wants to be involved. But Thomas needs stability, continuity of care. The medical team's reports all emphasize how well he's responding to his current routine. James thought about the therapy equipment in the barn, calibrated precisely for Thomas's needs, about the fundraising thermometer outside the church showing the community's progress toward their goal, about Lisa's face when she watched Thomas respond to his therapy exercises. Pride and grief mingled in her expression. The court-appointed mediator suggested a novel solution. Lisa's parents owned a small house on the edge of Cedar Grove, empty since her grandmother's passing. If Lisa moved there, they could work out a shared custody arrangement that would keep Thomas in his medical routine while allowing his birth mother to be part of his life. It's not traditional, the mediator admitted, but neither is this situation. Sometimes the law needs to bend to accommodate reality. James found Lisa in the therapy barn after one of their mediation sessions, watching Thomas work with his physical therapist. Her eyes tracked every movement, every small victory, every smile. "I didn't know," she said softly, not looking at James. "When I left him here, I didn't know about any of this. I couldn't give him what he needed, but you did. You and this whole town. We can give him more," James replied carefully. "Together." She turned then, really looking at him for the first time. "You'd share him after everything you've done, everything you've built for him." James thought about Sarah, about how she'd always said love multiplied rather than divided, about how Thomas deserved every chance at happiness, every person who could love him. "A child can't have too many people on his side," he said simply, "especially not this child." The first progress photos spread across Dr. Patterson's desk told a story that mere medical charts couldn't capture. In the earliest images, taken during Thomas's hospital stay, a fragile infant lay motionless below the waist, his expression uncertain, but the recent photos showed a different child entirely. Bright-eyed, engaging with his therapy equipment, his upper body notably stronger. "The improvement in muscle tone is remarkable," Dr. Patterson noted, comparing measurements, "especially in his core strength and upper extremities. Whatever you're doing in that converted barn of yours, keep it up." James studied the photos, remembering each moment captured. Thomas reaching for therapy balls, maintaining his sitting, position with minimal support. Even the first time he'd managed to roll himself over, a moment that had brought tears to everyone present. Lisa sat beside James during these progress reviews now, her initial nervousness around medical terminology giving way to genuine understanding. She'd thrown herself into learning Thomas's care routines with the same determination that had brought her back to claim her role in his life. Between her youth and James's experience, they'd found an unexpected rhythm. "Look at this one," she said softly, pointing to a photo taken just last week. Thomas was in his specially adapted therapy chair, back straight, hands gripping the support bar, face lit with concentration. 6 months ago, they said he might never... She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. They both remembered the early prognoses, the careful tempering of expectations. Now, spring sunshine streamed through the clinic windows, carrying the promise of possibilities neither of them had dared to hope for. The improvement wasn't just physical. Thomas had begun babbling more, engaging with his surroundings in new ways. His therapy sessions in the barn had become social occasions, with Lisa often joining James for the morning routines. They developed their own language of encouragement, their own ways of celebrating each small victory. "Da!" Thomas called, out clearly one morning, reaching for James as he adjusted the therapy equipment. The word hung in the air like a benediction. "Did he just—" Lisa's eyes were wide. "Ma!" Thomas added immediately after, spotting Lisa in the doorway with his morning bottle. James had to turn away for a moment, ostensibly to check the equipment settings. When he faced them again, Lisa was wiping her eyes while trying to maintain a professional demeanor about what they'd just witnessed. "Well," James said gruffly, his own voice not entirely steady, "guess he's decided to weigh in on this custody arrangement himself." The therapy barn had evolved with Thomas's progress. New equipment arrived as his abilities grew, each piece carefully integrated into their routine. The community fundraising thermometer outside the church had not only reached, but exceeded its goal, ensuring they could continue adapting to his needs. Spring brought other changes too. The medical supply company, impressed by the barn's setup, approached James about using it as a demonstration site for their pediatric equipment. Ellen helped draft an agreement that would provide Thomas with updated therapy tools, in exchange for hosting occasional training sessions for other families. "It's becoming something bigger than we imagined," Ellen observed one evening, watching. Lisa and James worked together to adapt Thomas's evening therapy routine. "This whole place is," she was right. The farm that had seemed to be failing 6 months ago had found a new purpose. The fields still needed attention. James wouldn't be a miller if he let them lie fallow, but they no longer carried the weight of being the property's sole focus. Amanda called more frequently now, her initial worry about her father taking on too much, replaced by genuine excitement about her new brother. She'd started planning a summer visit, talking about bringing her own children to meet Thomas and help with his therapy. "You know what this reminds me of?" Lisa asked one afternoon as they watched Thomas working determinedly with his newest therapy challenge. That children's story about the garden, the secret one, where everything that seemed dead just needed the right kind of care to come back to life. James looked around the barn, at the state-of-the-art equipment nestled in the historic structure, at the spring sunshine streaming through windows that had been designed to preserve the building's character while serving its new purpose, at the way Thomas's determination reflected both his mother's youth and his adoptive father's steadiness. "Not so secret anymore," he replied, smiling as Thomas let out a triumphant laugh, achieving whatever small goal he'd set for himself in that moment, but definitely growing. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, its certified mail stamp and law firm letterhead casting a shadow over the morning's usual therapy routine. Lisa recognized the sender's address immediately, her face draining of color as she handed the envelope. "To James. It's from Marcus's father," she whispered. "The Thompson family firm. Marcus Thompson III, Thomas's biological father, had vanished from Lisa's life the moment the prenatal tests revealed complications. Now, nearly a year later, his family's influence was making itself known through carefully worded legal paragraphs. "Our client has become aware of the minor child's situation," the letter stated clinically, "and wishes to assert his parental rights. While he understands arrangements have been made, Mr. Thompson believes his son's interests would be better served in an environment more suited to the family's social and financial position." James read the words twice, each line feeling like a physical blow. The Thompsons were old money, their name attached to half the buildings in the county seat. Against their resources, what chance did a struggling farmer and a 19-year-old mother have? "He can't." Lisa's voice shook. "He walked away. He told me to take care of it, said he wouldn't be involved." Thomas, oblivious to the adult's distress, worked happily with his morning therapy routine. His latest achievement, holding himself upright for nearly 5 minutes, had been celebrated just yesterday. Now, watching him concentrate on his exercises, James felt a fierce protectiveness that transcended any legal document. Ellen arrived for her regular check-in to find them still at the kitchen table, the letter lying between them like an unexploded shell. "They're saying," Lisa managed between sharp breaths, "that they can provide better care. Private nurses, a full-time medical staff, the kind of treatment we could never." "Treatment isn't just about money," Ellen interrupted firmly. "Thomas's progress isn't just about equipment. Look at his charts, his response rates. He's thriving because of the stability, the routine, the consistent care from people who love him." But the Thompsons' lawyer had anticipated this argument. The letter outlined plans for a fully staffed care facility on their estate, complete with rehabilitation specialists and round-the-clock medical supervision. On paper, it seemed impossible to argue against. "They didn't want him?" James said, quietly, his first words since reading the letter. "When it mattered, when he was just a diagnosis, a medical challenge, an inconvenience, they turned their backs." The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of Thomas's happy babbling drifting in from his therapy mat in the living room. His morning routine continued unchanged, his world still anchored by the love and care that surrounded him. Ma. His calls for attention had become more insistent lately, his personality emerging stronger with each passing day. James and Lisa exchanged glances, a year's worth of shared struggles and triumphs passing between them. "I won't let them take him," Lisa said suddenly, her voice finding strength. "They threw us away once. They don't get to come back now that someone else has done all the hard work. Now that he's proving everyone wrong about what he can do." James stood, walking to the window that overlooked the therapy barn. The morning sun caught the new weather vane. They'd installed a horse in full gallop, a reminder of thunder and the sacrifice that had started all of this. "Ellen," he turned back to the room, "get David Chen on the phone. Lisa, call your parents. I think it's time we showed the Thompsons exactly what they're up against." The next few hours brought a flurry of activity. David Chen arrived with briefcase in hand. Ellen pulled Thomas's medical records showing his exceptional progress under the current care arrangement, and Lisa's parents came bearing their own stack of documentation, texts, emails, and letters, showing Marcus's abandonment and the family's previous denial of responsibility. But it was the arrival of Margaret Wilson, clutching the Cedar Grove Gazette's photo archives, that added the final piece. Months of community coverage, the barn renovation, the fundraisers, the therapy sessions, the steady documentation of Thomas's journey told a story that no amount of money could match. "They may have wealth," David Chen said, surveying the assembled evidence, "but we have something better. We have proof of love." The draft custody agreement spread across the conference room table at David Chen's office, its margins filled with handwritten notes from all parties. After weeks of negotiations, threats, and counter-threats, an unexpected path forward had emerged from an unlikely source: Marcus Thompson III himself. The young man who walked into the mediation session bore little resemblance to the polished corporate photo Lisa remembered. 3 hours of watching Thomas's therapy videos, seeing his son's determination, his progress, his joy, had cracked something in Marcus's carefully maintained facade. "I was wrong," he'd said quietly after the last video ended. "When I walked away, I was young, scared, overwhelmed by the diagnosis. But watching him now, seeing what he's achieved, what you've all built for him." He looked at James and Lisa in turn. "I didn't understand then. I think I'm starting to now." The solution they crafted wasn't simple, but then nothing about Thomas's story had been. The Thompson family's resources would be put into a trust for Thomas's ongoing medical care, administered by a board that included James, Lisa, and Marcus's. Mother Catherine, a retired pediatric nurse whose expertise had been wasted in society functions. "We can provide the financial security," Catherine explained, her professional demeanor softening as she watched Thomas work through his morning exercises. "But you've created something here that money can't buy. This environment, this community, this love. We'd be fools to disrupt that." The draft agreement reflected this understanding. James would maintain primary physical custody, with Lisa continuing her daily involvement. The therapy barn would be expanded, funded by the trust, to serve other children with similar needs. Marcus would have visitation rights, contingent on his completion of a parenthood course and active participation in Thomas's therapy routine. "It's not exactly conventional," David Chen admitted, reviewing the document's complex terms. "But then, nothing about this family has been." The word family caught everyone's attention. They had become one, hadn't they? Not in the traditional sense, but in the way that mattered most. People committed to Thomas's well-being, each bringing their own strengths to the challenge. Ellen, present as both medical advisor and trusted friend, watched the dynamic shift during these meetings. She saw how Catherine's medical knowledge complemented her own oversight, how Marcus's business acumen could help secure Thomas's future, how the combination of James's steady devotion and Lisa's youthful energy created a perfect balance. "Look at this section." Catherine pointed to a clause about educational planning. "We should consider incorporating music therapy. The latest research shows remarkable results with motor skill development." James thought about the hymns that calmed Thomas during difficult therapy sessions. Already seeing some of that. He responds differently when there's music playing in the barn. "We could set up a proper program," Marcus offered tentatively. "I know someone who specializes in adaptive instruments for children with physical challenges." Lisa watched this exchange with growing wonder. The people who had once abandoned her and Thomas were now planning his future with the same dedication she'd found in James and the Cedar Grove community. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but perhaps something more important: growth, understanding, commitment to do better. The final draft included provisions none of them had initially imagined. The therapy barn would become a proper rehabilitation center, serving children throughout the county. The Thompson Trust would ensure its financial stability, while James's practical experience and Lisa's emerging interest in physical therapy education would guide its development. "There's one more thing," Marcus said as they reviewed the last details. He pulled out a separate document, papers for a small business loan in Lisa's name. "For your therapy certification courses. Mom says you have a natural talent for it, and the center will need qualified staff." Lisa's hand shook as she took the papers. 2 years ago, she'd been a scared teenager facing an impossible choice. Now she was crafting a future she'd never dared imagine, surrounded by support she'd never expected to find. James watched all this from his usual spot near Thomas's therapy mat, where his son was showing off his latest achievement, holding a sitting position while reaching for toys, his face bright with concentration and joy. "Da, Ma, see," the adults paused in their discussion Turning to witness the moment, Thomas had grabbed not one, but two therapy rings, one in each hand, his balance perfect, his smile triumphant. In that instant, James saw the future they were building reflected in his son's determination. A future where challenges became opportunities, where broken things were made whole in new ways, where family meant something bigger than blood or obligation. "That's it, son," James encouraged softly, his voice carrying all the love and hope they'd woven into the agreement before them. "Show us what's possible." The new farm business plan didn't look anything like the ledgers James's father had kept. Spread across his kitchen table, the document merged agricultural tradition with medical innovation in ways Robert Miller could never have imagined. Pete Martinez had outdone himself, creating detailed renderings of how each part of the property could serve its new purpose while honoring its heritage. "We'll keep the eastern fields in production," James explained to the mixed group gathered around. "The plans, therapeutic riding programs need good hay, and there's something about watching things grow that helps with healing." Catherine Thompson nodded approvingly, her medical expertise finding common ground with James's farming wisdom. The connection to nature, the rhythm of the seasons, it's all part of holistic therapy. The old dairy barn, where Thunder had spent his last months on the farm, would become the main rehabilitation center. The architectural drawings showed how its soaring ceiling and natural light could accommodate advanced therapy equipment while maintaining its rustic character. The hayloft would transform into a family waiting area, complete with observation windows to watch sessions below. "What about here?" Lisa pointed to the fallow field behind the barn. Her therapy certification courses had sparked ideas that blended perfectly with James's agricultural knowledge. "We could create a sensory garden, different textures, scents, raised beds at wheelchair height." Marcus, who had been quietly absorbing everything, spoke up. "The business model is solid. Insurance companies are increasingly supporting alternative therapy settings, especially ones that can demonstrate measurable outcomes like Thomas's progress." Thomas himself was busy demonstrating that progress, working with Ellen on a new set of exercises near the wood stove. His determined up punctuated the planning session, drawing smiles from everyone present. The transformation wouldn't happen overnight. The plan laid out phases, each building on the success of the last. Phase 1 focused on expanding the existing therapy barn and establishing the basic infrastructure. Phase 2 would add the sensory garden and adaptive playground. Phase 3 envisioned residential facilities for families traveling from further away. "We'll need to hire staff," Ellen noted, making additions to her copy of the plan. "Physical therapists, occupational therapists, maybe even a child psychologist. But we should maintain the family atmosphere. That's been crucial to Thomas's progress." James studied the renderings of the proposed changes. The familiar silhouette of his family's farm remained, but now it was filled with new purpose. The fields where he'd grown up working alongside his father would still produce crops, but they'd feed more than bodies. They'd nourish hope. "What about this section?" Catherine asked, indicating the old machine shed. "It seems underutilized." "In the current plan?" "Actually," James cleared his throat, "I was thinking about that. We've had inquiries from the veterinary school about incorporating animal therapy. That building would make a good stable, specially designed for adaptive riding programs." Lisa brightened. "Like Thunder. We could help kids the way he helped Thomas, giving them something to work toward, to connect with." "Speaking of Thunder," Marcus interjected, "I made some calls. The breeding farm in Kentucky. They'd be willing to work out an arrangement. One of his colts, specially trained for therapy work. A way of bringing things full circle." James had to turn away for a moment, ostensibly to check on Thomas. The thought of Thunder's bloodline returning to the farm, continuing the legacy of healing that had started with one desperate decision to sell him. It felt like Sarah's hand at work somehow. The business plan's final page projected financial sustainability within 3 years. The Thompson Trust would provide initial capital, But the goal was self-sufficiency through a combination of insurance payments, grants, and innovative programming. James's farm wouldn't just survive, it would thrive by helping others overcome their own challenges. Dad would have scratched his head at first, James mused, running his hand over the smooth paper. But Mom, she'd have seen it right away. She always said farming was about nurturing growth, whatever form that took. As if to emphasize the point, Thomas's voice rang out again. "Look! Look!" They turned to find him maintaining his sitting position while rotating his upper body, a new milestone that sent Ellen scrambling for her progress notes. James watched his son, surrounded by people who had become family in the most unexpected ways, all of them working together to transform a failing farm into something extraordinary. The business plan might have been full of numbers and projections, but the real bottom line was written in Thomas's triumphant smile, in Lisa's growing confidence, in the way an entire community had come together to prove that healing could take root in the most unexpected soil. The physical therapy achievement video started like dozens before it, Thomas in his therapy room, surrounded by the equipment that had become as familiar as toys. But this session was different. Ellen had insisted on recording it, something in her voice making everyone drop what they were doing to gather in the barn. The morning light streamed through the new windows, casting warm squares on the specially padded floor. Thomas sat in his adapted chair, wearing the determined expression that always reminded James of Sarah tackling a difficult problem. At 14 months old, his upper body strength had exceeded everyone's expectations, but his legs had remained frustratingly still until today. "Ready, Thomas?" Ellen's voice came from behind the camera. "Show everyone what you practiced." Lisa stood beside James, her hand gripping his arm. Marcus and Catherine had driven in from the city, alerted by Ellen's cryptic but urgent message. Even Dr. Patterson had rearranged his schedule to be present, his usual professional detachment softened by anticipation. Thomas gripped the parallel, bars that had been custom-built to his size, another Thompson family contribution. His face screwed up in concentration, a bead of sweat already forming on his forehead. Then, with a grunt of effort that seemed too big for his small body, he pulled himself upright. This much they'd seen before. Thomas had been managing, supported, standing for several weeks now. But then, "Come on, sweetheart," Lisa whispered. "You can do it." His right leg trembled. Not the random movements they'd documented before, but a deliberate, focused effort. Slowly, painfully slowly, his foot slid forward half an inch. The barn went silent except for the soft whir of Ellen's camera. Thomas's face was a study in pure determination as he focused all his energy on that single leg. Another small slide. Forward. Then incredibly his left leg began to move as well. "Doc?" James's voice was barely audible. "Is this—" "Keep recording," Dr. Patterson breathed. "Every second." Over the next 10 minutes, Thomas managed 4 tiny but distinct movements forward. Each one drew gasps and hastily wiped tears from the adults watching. When he finally sank back into his chair, exhausted but grinning, the barn erupted in cheers. "That's my boy!" James swept Thomas up in his arms, no longer trying to hide his tears. "That's my strong boy." Lisa was sobbing openly, her arms around both of them. Even Marcus, who usually maintained careful composure, had to turn away to collect himself. Catherine was already on her phone, cancelling her afternoon appointments. This day would be for family only. Dr. Patterson reviewed the video immediately, his professional excitement breaking through. The new treatment protocol, combined with his consistent therapy, but even so, this level of mobility, he shook his head in wonder. "We need to document this properly. This could help other children with similar conditions." Ellen was already ahead of him, uploading the video to Thomas's medical file and making detailed notes. His core strength has been improving steadily, but this level of leg mobility, we hadn't dared hope for this so soon. The video would become something of a legend in physical therapy circles. Specialists would study the precise combination of treatments, exercises, and support that had led to this breakthrough. But they all knew it wasn't just about medical protocols and equipment. "Look at his face in that moment," Lisa said later, as they watched the video for what felt like the 100th time. "That's pure Miller stubbornness right there," James chuckled, "with a good dose of your determination thrown in." They celebrated that evening on the farm. Betty Harrison brought one of her famous cakes, decorated with wobbly legs that made everyone laugh through tears. The therapy barn filled with people who had become family, each one having played a part in making this moment possible. Thomas, tired but happy, sat in his chair, surveying his domain. His legs still moved occasionally, as if testing their new capabilities, each tiny motion drawing appreciative gasps from his audience. "You know what this means," Catherine said quietly to James. "More children could have this chance. What you've all built here, it's going to change lives." James watched his son, remembering that cold morning when he'd found him by the broken stroller, how close they'd come to a different story. How many pieces had needed to fall into place to create this miracle. "Sarah used to say that hope was like a seed," he replied. "Plant it in the right soil, tend it properly, and there's no telling what might grow." The video played one more time on Ellen's tablet, capturing forever the moment when the impossible became possible. In it, Thomas's face showed no surprise at his achievement, only the satisfaction of someone proving what they'd known all along. "Again," Thomas demanded from his chair, pointing at the parallel bars. "Again." And in that moment, watching his son prepare to defy expectations one more time, James understood that this wasn't just a medical breakthrough. It was a testament to what love could build, what determination could achieve, what family in all its unexpected forms could nurture into being. The family portrait hung in the farmhouse living room, catching the afternoon light in a way that made it seem almost alive. It wasn't your typical formal photography studio shot. Instead, it captured a moment in the therapy barn. Everyone gathered around Thomas as he worked with his parallel bars. The photographer had caught them all off guard, focused on Thomas rather than the camera, their expressions unguarded and real. James stood at Thomas's right, hands hovering protectively but not touching, letting his son work through the challenge himself. Lisa mirrored his position on the left, her therapy certification badge visible on her scrubs. Marcus sat at Thomas's eye level, offering encouragement, while Catherine stood behind him, her nurse's instincts evident in her watchful pose. Ellen had somehow made it into the frame too, her presence as much a part of the family story as anyone's. The photo had been taken the day the final adoption papers were signed, though it showed nothing of the legal proceedings that had happened that morning. Instead, it captured something more fundamental, a family built not through traditional bonds, but through choice, challenge, and unwavering commitment. "I still can't believe how simple it was in the end," Lisa said, adjusting Thomas's therapy schedule on the whiteboard that had become command central for their daily routines. All those months of legal negotiations, and then everyone just agreed. The solution had emerged organically, much like everything else in their unusual family. James and Lisa would share primary custody, with Marcus's parental rights preserved, but voluntarily delegated to allow for James's adoption of Thomas. The arrangement was supposedly unprecedented in the family court's experience, but then so was everything about their situation. "Sometimes the law catches up to reality," David Chen had said, watching them all sign the papers. "And sometimes reality creates something better than the law could have imagined." The therapy center was thriving, with a waiting list that stretched months ahead. Lisa's certification had come through with honors, her hands-on experience with Thomas proving invaluable in her studies. She split her time between Thomas's care and working with other children, her natural gift for the work drawing praise from visiting specialists. Marcus had found his place too, his business acumen helping to expand the center's reach, while his growing relationship with Thomas gave him a purpose he'd never found in corporate law. Catherine's medical expertise shaped their programs, while her grandmother's heart showed in the personal touches she added to every child's care plan. Da, ma, papa! Thomas's calls rang through the barn, his vocabulary expanding along with his mobility. He had names for everyone now, his world rich with people who loved him. James watched him work through his exercises, each movement a little stronger than the last. "You know," Ellen said, updating Thomas's progress charts, "when I first met him in the hospital, I never imagined—" She didn't need to finish. None of them could have imagined this. The failing farm transformed into a beacon of hope. Strangers, becoming family, pain and fear, giving way to purpose and joy. The adoption certificate joined other documents in James's study. Thomas's therapy logs, Lisa's certification, the center's incorporation papers. But it was the family portrait that told the true story. The way Thomas beamed with achievement, the natural poses of everyone around him, the love evident in every face. This was the real record of what they'd built together. "I added another session slot," Lisa announced, stepping back from the whiteboard. "That family from Oklahoma, the one with twins, they'll be here next month." James nodded, remembering their application. 2 girls, close to Thomas's age, with a condition similar to his. Their parents had seen the video of Thomas's breakthrough, hope rekindling in their eyes as they watched what was possible. "We'll need to prepare the guest cottage," Catherine noted, already making lists. "And Marcus, can you look into additional funding for the adaptive playground?" "Already done," Marcus replied, bouncing Thomas gently on his knee during a therapy break. "The foundation approved it yesterday." They work together seamlessly now, each person's strengths complementing the others. The initial awkwardness had given way to an efficiency born of shared purpose and deep respect. "More," Thomas demanded, pointing to his parallel bars. His rest break apparently over, he was ready for another round of exercises. "That's my boy," James, Lisa and Marcus said in unison, then laughed at the coincidence. The family portrait caught the afternoon sun, the glass reflecting the present scene in the therapy barn, past and present overlapping, showing how far they'd come and hinting at all that still lay ahead. A family forged in challenge, strengthened by love, and now, finally, blessed by law. The anniversary celebration invitation spread through Cedar Grove like wildfire, its hand-drawn design featuring a child's footprints, walking across the page. "1 year of steps forward," it read. "Please join us in celebrating Thomas's journey." And the opening of the Miller-Thompson Center for Adaptive Therapy. Standing in the renovated barn's entrance, James barely recognized the property that had seemed so close to failing just a year ago. The therapy center gleamed with purpose, its blend of modern equipment and rustic charm drawing admirers from across the country. The eastern fields waved with hay, destined for the therapeutic riding program, while the sensory garden bloomed with carefully chosen plants that children in wheelchairs could reach and experience. "Can you believe it?" Amanda asked, having flown in from Chicago with her family for the celebration. "Dad, I keep thinking about how worried I was when you first told me about finding Thomas. Now look at all this." What had started as one farmer's desperate attempt to help an abandoned child had grown into something none of them could have imagined. The center now employed 15 people, including Lisa as head of pediatric therapy and Catherine overseeing medical protocols. Marcus had surprised everyone by leaving his law practice to manage the center full-time, his corporate experience helping transform their dream into a sustainable reality. "Gamma!" Thomas's voice rang out as Catherine entered, his legs braced but moving with increasing confidence as he made his way toward her. His progress had exceeded every expectation, each new achievement carefully documented to help other children with similar conditions. The celebration brought together everyone who had played a part in their story. Betty Harrison had outdone herself with the catering, the refreshment tables groaning with enough food to feed half the county. Pete Martinez beamed as visitors admired his architectural work, while Bob Wilson led tours of the latest facility additions. Ellen, now the center's chief medical coordinator, had created a timeline display along one wall. Photos, medical charts, and news clippings traced their journey from that cold autumn morning to today. The broken stroller, carefully preserved, held a place of honor, a reminder of how close they'd come to a very different outcome. Remember this? Lisa touched a photo of Thomas's first supported standing session. Look how far he's come. Indeed, Thomas had become something of a celebrity in physical therapy circles. The video of his first steps had gone viral in medical communities, leading to research papers and new treatment protocols. But more importantly, it had given hope to other families facing similar challenges. The guest book filled with messages from those families. "Thank you for showing us what's possible," wrote one mother. "Your story gave us courage to keep trying," added another. Each entry reinforced what they'd learned. Sometimes the greatest healing came from knowing you weren't alone. "Speech time," Margaret Wilson called out, tapping her glass for attention. James hadn't prepared anything formal, but as he looked around at the gathered faces, his expanded family, the community that had rallied around them, the new staff who had caught their vision, the words came naturally. "A year ago," he began, "this was just a struggling farm with an old barn and tired fields. But someone very wise once told me that love was like a seed. Plant it in the right soil, tend it properly, and there's no telling what might grow." He glanced at Sarah's picture, specially placed for the occasion. My wife Sarah knew that. She taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about showing up, about believing in possibility even when things seem impossible. Thomas sat in his special chair near the front, Lisa and Marcus on either side of him. His legs, once completely immobile, now moved with purpose when he concentrated. His latest achievement, standing unassisted for almost a minute, had been celebrated just last week. "This center," James continued, "isn't just about physical therapy. It's about hope, it's about community. It's about remembering that healing comes in many forms, and sometimes the best medicine is knowing you're not facing challenges alone." He raised his glass. "To everyone who helped build this dream, to the families who trust us with their children's care, to my extraordinary son who teaches me every day about courage and determination, and to Sarah whose love still grows in everything we do here." "To Sarah," the crowd echoed, many eyes damp. Thomas, not to be left out, raised his own cup. "To Mama Sarah," he called out clearly, using the name they'd taught him for the grandmother he'd never met, but whose love had helped make his life possible. As the celebration continued around them, James watched Thomas demonstrate his latest therapy achievements for an admiring audience. His son's face shone with the same determination he'd shown from the beginning, but now there was confidence too, the security of knowing he was surrounded by people who believed in him, supported him, loved him. The invitation had promised steps forward, and looking around at all they'd built together, James knew they'd delivered on that promise in ways no one could have imagined. Every step, whether physical or metaphorical, had brought them closer to this moment, this gathering, this family that defied convention, but proved that love, like hope, could grow in the most unexpected places. The stack of thank you letters in James's study told a story that numbers and medical charts never could. Each one spoke of hope rekindled, of children making progress, of families finding strength they didn't know they had. But one letter, in particular, caught his eye as he sorted through the morning's mail. "Dear Mr. Miller," it began in careful handwriting. "My name is Emily, and I'm 10 years old. The doctor said I would never walk, but after 3 months at your center, I took my first steps. Mom says you found a baby who couldn't walk either, and that's why you built this place. I wanted you to know that because you didn't give up on him, a lot of us aren't giving up either." The letter trembled slightly in James's weathered hands. Through the window, he could see Thomas in the sensory garden, working with a new patient, a 6-month-old girl who'd been brought in with a condition strikingly similar to his own. His son's legs, now supported by lightweight braces instead of confined to a wheelchair, moved with purpose as he demonstrated exercises for the baby's parents. "See," Thomas was saying, his voice carrying clearly. "I couldn't move at all when my dad found me, but we never stopped trying." Lisa stood nearby, her therapy certification now supplemented by years of practical experience. She'd become known in medical circles for her innovative approaches to early intervention, her methods shaped by Thomas's journey. The sight of her working with families, sharing not just professional knowledge but personal understanding, never failed to fill James with pride. A familiar rumble of hooves drew his attention to the paddock, where Marcus was leading therapy sessions with Thunder's son, Promise. The young horse had his father's gentle temperament and impressive size, but had been specially trained from birth for adaptive riding. The breeding farm had donated him after seeing videos of their program's success, closing a circle that had begun with James's sacrifice of Thunder. "There's something about connecting with an animal," Catherine had explained when they'd first proposed adding equine therapy. "It bypasses some of the mental barriers to physical therapy, especially in younger children." The center had grown beyond any of their original expectations. What started as one converted barn was now a comprehensive facility, with the original farm buildings repurposed but preserved. The old farmhouse served as a welcome center and administrative space, its walls lined with before and after photos of their success stories. The fields produced specialized hay for the therapy horses, while the sensory garden had become a model for similar facilities across the country. "Dad!" Thomas called out, spotting him in the window. "Come meet Sophie. She's going to be staying with us for the summer program." James made his way down to the garden, each step reminding him of how far they'd come. The baby girl in her adaptive chair watched him approach with bright, curious eyes, the same look he'd seen in Thomas's face that first morning. "Sophie's parents drove all the way from California," Lisa explained. "They saw the video of Thomas's first steps." The young couple had that familiar mix of hope and fear in their eyes, the same look James remembered seeing in his own reflection during those early days. But there was something else too, something that hadn't been available to him then, the knowledge that they weren't alone. "Welcome to the family," James said simply, and watched their tension ease slightly at the warmth in his voice. Ellen appeared with her ever-present tablet, already starting a new case file. "Shall we show them the therapy barn? Thomas has physical therapy scheduled anyway. Might be good for Sophie's parents to see a session." As they walked toward the barn, James felt a small hand slip into his. Thomas had come a long way from the motionless baby by the broken stroller, but some things hadn't changed, like the trust in his grip, the determination in his eyes, the way he could light up a room with his smile. The therapy barn doors opened to reveal the space that had started it all. New equipment shared space with the original parallel bars where Thomas had taken his first steps. Sunlight streamed through windows that had been designed to preserve the building's character while serving its new purpose. The hayloft, now a family consultation room, still carried the faintest scent of summer grass. "Before we start," Ellen said to Sophie's parents, "would you like to hear our story?" Thomas straightened proudly. This was his favorite part, sharing their journey, showing other families that miracles could grow from the hardest ground. "It began," James started, the familiar words carrying the weight of everything they'd built together, "on a cold autumn morning when a farmer who thought his best days were behind him found something unexpected at the edge of his field. The broken stroller still sits in its place of honor at the Miller-Thompson Center, a reminder that sometimes life's greatest blessings arrive in moments of crisis." The therapy barn that started with one determined father and his son now serves hundreds of families each year, each with their own story of hope and healing. James Miller no longer farms corn and hay alone. He cultivates hope, harvests determination, and plants seeds of possibility in every child who comes through their doors. The family he built spans far beyond blood or legal documents, growing with each new patient who finds their strength in the same soil where Thomas took his first steps. And on quiet evenings, when the therapy sessions are done and the sun sets over the sensory garden, James often thinks of Sarah's words about love being like a seed. Some seeds, he's learned, just need the right kind of soil to grow into forests of hope.